السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على ختم الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Quduri, in the section on mu'amalat, on financial transactions, we have reached Babul Kafala, having a guarantor. So we looked at wakala, appointing an agent, kafala, right? Now, we need, one thing one needs to be careful about is terminology. So kafala, right, has different terms in different contexts, different usages in different contexts. Sometimes kafala, ana wa kafilul yatim, I and the one who takes care of the orphan are like these two in paradise, said the Prophet ﷺ, bringing two fingers close together. And the ulama said not to bring one's fingers close together to do it. Apologies if you saw my fingers. It's not haram, but just in terms of adab, because we don't know exactly how the Prophet ﷺ raised his fingers. But because the word kafala has a general usage and a specific contextual meaning, right? So that the one who who serves as a guardian for the orphan has the reward of being very close to the Prophet ﷺ in the hereafter, right? It's a tremendous honor. However, kafala here is to be a guarantor for another, right? Right? And there's a relationship between the two chapters as mentioned, right? Having a guarantor, the purpose of having a guarantor is highlighted in it. We'll look at what kafala is, etc. Right? Al-kafala, right? The commentator tells us, kafala, having a guarantor, lughatan ad-damm, is to bring two things together, right? And the legal definition, he says, ضم ذمة إلى ذمة في المطالبة, is to add one person's responsibility to another's responsibility in terms of the right of demand. So we understand it in a scenario, right? That I want to buy a shipment of $50,000 worth of books from Istanbul. Yeah, late, right? Now the bookseller, and I'm going to pay him over a year, right? $4,100 whatever dollars a month. The bookseller wants a guarantor. What if I'm not able to make those payments, right? So this transaction would enter into my dhimma, into my dues, into my responsibility, right? Kafala is when you bring a guarantor. What's a guarantor? You add another's responsibility to my responsibility insofar as they acquire the right of demand, right? Fil mutalaba. Right? What is its consequence? In the Majalla item 634, it says حكم الكفالة المطالبة. The ruling, meaning the consequence of kafala, is the right of demand. يعني للمكفول به حق المطالبة، يعني حق مطالبة المكفول به عن الكفيل. Right? So the one who's owed has the right to demand from the party who owes them and from their guarantor. Right? Here in the works on the Majalla, for example, you can see you can find good definitions of of what is dhimma, like the dues, right? 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 The dues or the responsibility of a person, right? And this idea of the dhimma, right? Of that which is due upon a person, right? Their burden, and it's related to our moral responsibility, and there's a metaphysical dimension to the dhimma, right? That even the hadith, the fuqaha talk about it, right? Because it is based upon the covenant between creation and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? In the Yawm al-Mithaq, on the day of the covenant, alastu bi rabbikum, right? And it is through having a dhimma, says, a wasfun sara bihi al-insanu mukallafan. It is by having this responsibility, this wi'a'un i'tibari, these dues. It's like an intangible vessel in which rights enter and through which rights must be discharged, right? So anyways, so that's the dhimma. And before we look at the chapter, there are a few terms that in Arabic people get confused, right? Right? And in the Majalla, for those who are following, you see items 618, 619, etc. You can see that the kafil, like the guarantor is هو الذي ضم ذمته إلى ذمة الآخر, right? The guarantor is the one who added their responsibility to the responsibility of another in terms of being demanded, right? So they're the one who is a party that gives the security, right? Like they're the securing party. So there's one person who took on the debt, and there's another, the guarantor, the kafil, is the one who added their responsibility to the responsibility of the one who took on the debt. Okay, that's the kafil, right? Sometimes the one in debt is called the asil, the original party, right? They're also called al-makful anhu, the one who is being, the party that is being guaranteed. So they have the guarantor, who's the kafil, and the party being guaranteed, that's referred to as al-makful anhu. They're also called the asil, the original party, right? The one who took on the debt. And then you have al-makful lahu, who the guarantee is for, who is the party who has the right to demand. So I purchased $50,000 worth of books from Dar al-Bayruti in Turkey. This not an actual transaction. Don't, if my wife sees this, I didn't, right? So, right, I needed to give a guarantor. So let's say the entrepreneur sister is the guarantor. She's the kafil. I am, what's my name? I am the makful lahu. I am the one whom the guarantee, who's being guaranteed. I am the original party and the asil. Who is this who sought the guarantee? So I'm the makful anhu. Right? I'm the one whose debt is being guaranteed. Right? I'm the makful anhu. The guarantee, the kafala, is for the seller who has the right of demand, for example, and they're called the makful lahu. Right? The one who has the right to demand, the one the debt is owed to. Right? So these are terms people get confused about them. So before we wade into the chapter, it's good to have a list of these terms, right? So you have the kafil, who is the guarantor, right? He's the person who's guaranteeing the debt, right? There is the makful anhu, the one whose debt is being guaranteed, right? But they're the original party who owes the debt. That's they're also called the asil, the original party. Right? They're the makful anhu. Who is this guarantee being given to? That is the makful lahu. Right? Who's the guarantee being given to? And that's the person, like the seller, for example, the party who's owed the money. In this case, the bookseller in Istanbul, let's say. Right? And there's also the makful bihi. What is the guarantee for? It's for those books. Right? It's for, the guarantee is for the payment owed for the books. Right? That's the debt. For example, هو الشيء الذي تعهد الكفيل بأدائه وتسليمه. It is what? The party who, like what have you undertaken to guarantee? So these can all be found in the in the majalla, and you should have, and of course someone who prepared would have done work like this in advance. Okay. Right? And okay. So we wanted to highlight these to understand how to navigate this chapter. Okay. So he says al-kafala. The kafala, a contract of having a guarantor. على ضربين. كفالة بالنفس وكفالة بالمال. You can be a guarantor for a person, or you can be a guarantor for money. Right? فالكفالة بالنفس جائزة. Being a guarantor for a person, right? Right? And this discussed in Majalla item 613, if you want to look it up, is valid. Right? And why would you guarantee a person? He explains, وَالْمَضْمُونُ بِهَا إِحْضَارُ الْمَكْفُولِ بِهِ. Right? That what's being guaranteed in this case is to bring the one, al-makful bihi, the one being guaranteed. Right? So let's say there's a court case against someone. They're being accused of a crime. So there's a danger that the person might flee. So until the court date, in order to prevent their fleeing, they could be in detention. They're not being punished, but they're being detained until their court date. But that could cause all kinds of trouble. Imagine, I want to enter into a transaction with somebody, so what do? I arrange a court case against my competitor so that they get thrown in jail, in detention, so I can complete the transaction instead. Right? Let's say the daughter of this wealthy merchant comes to town and people say, oh, his daughter is very righteous and so on. So Zubayr wants to propose to her, but he hears that Amr is going to go and propose, so he makes an accusation against him, so the guy gets detained. So to prevent this kind of thing, one of the things is to have a guarantor. You have a guarantor, a kafil, bin nafs, that look, we'll release this person, but give a guarantor so that this person takes it on to make sure that the person is serious about showing up to court. Right? And if the person doesn't, but then if, for example, I serve as the kafil, as the guarantor, that Zubayr will in fact come to court, then if he doesn't, I am I can be forced by the qadi. وَإِلَّا يُجْبَرْ عَلَى إِحْضَارِهِ. Otherwise, I am compelled by the court to ensure that he comes, right? And and we'll see what happens if he doesn't, right? وَتَنْعَقِدْ, and this kafala bin nafs, being a guarantor for a person that they'll come to court. إذا قال تكلفت بنفس فلان, that I'm a guarantor for the person of so and so. أو رقبته, or literally their neck. أو بروحه, or by their soul. أو بجسده, or their body. أو برأسه. In every expression that's used to refer to the person, right? And these vary from language. أو بنصفه أو ثلثه, I'll bring half of them or a third of them. This would be, why would someone say this? Well, if they did, it would still count. Because a person, you're not going to divide their third. Like, no one's going to go and chop Amr's legs and say, well, I bought a third of him. He's on vacation otherwise. وكذلك إن قالت ضمنته أو هو علي أو إلي أو أنا به زعيم, or any other expression that entails clearly being their guarantor, right? That if you say he is upon me to bring, right? هو علي, or it is on to me that their responsibility accrues, or I am responsible for bringing them, right? Right? أو قبيل, or they're upon me. Okay. فإن شرط في الكفالة تسليم المكفول به في وقت بعينه لزمه. If it's made a condition that the individual be brought at a particular time, then this is required of them to do so, of the guarantor, right? وإذا طلبه به في ذلك الوقت, and then if the one for whom the guarantee is being made demands that they come at that time, and then if they do so, then they've done their responsibility. He says, okay, I'll bring Amr to court on this time, or I'll bring him for payment on this time, right? وإلا, and if they don't bring him, حبسه الحاكم, then the judge can detain the guarantor. That's the whole point of being a guarantor, right? They're responsible to bring the person, otherwise they would be detained until they took the means of bringing them. So this is a risky thing to do unless you really trust the person. وإن أحضره وسلمه في مكان يقدر المكفول له على محاكمته برئ الكفيل من الكفالة. Then what's the responsibility of the guarantor in the kafala bin nafs, in being responsible for a person? That if they bring them and deliver them to a place where the one this guarantee was for could seek justice from them, right? Like they brought them to the suitable place, then the guarantor has discharged their guarantee, their kafala, right? ويتكفل به على تسليمه في مجلس القاضي فسلمه في السوق برئ. Now this is an opinion where Imam Abu Hanifa we have to appreciate, was at an early time. He was within the first generations where amana was widespread. So this transmitted position here in Quduri is from Imam Abu Hanifa, that if the guarantor took on to deliver the person to the majlis of the qadi, to court, but they delivered him to the market, they brought them to the market, say, here is Amr. So they brought him to the market, but they didn't take him all the way to court. They said, Abu Hanifa said, they've done their part. Why? Because there's presumptions underlying the ruling, right? That most people were generally upright. There's two levels of uprightness that are considered in the Sharia: adalat al-zahir, adalat al-batin. Outward uprightness and inward uprightness, being truly upright. Zahir al-adala, the basic uprightness, the assumption of uprightness, general assumption of uprightness, can be acted upon so that if you brought someone to the marketplace, people would not act in a dishonorable way. Even the corrupt would not act in a dishonorable way once you brought them to the market. Why? Because people would not deal with dishonorable people. Right? And you have to understand this in the context. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, لا يدخل سوقنا من لم يتفقه في ديننا. No one may enter our marketplace if they haven't gained a deep understanding of our religion. Right? And the rest of the narration, the athar is, فإنه يقع في الربا شاء أم أبى. Otherwise they'll fall into riba whether they wish to or not. Right? So that kind of khuluq could be assumed at least at the very basic level. Right? Right? But the fatwa is no. Right? That's why they said no. This is not. This way the author says. What the commentator says. قِيلَ لَا يَبْرَأْ فِي زَمَانٍ. This is not fulfilled. I.e. that if you took it upon to bring them to court, then you have to bring them to the court itself. Right? Because we could safely assume that if the person fled, that they were in collusion. Right? Right? And this is even mentioned in the Hidayah, and is mentioned in the Durr al-Mukhtar, quoting Ibn Malak, وَبِهِ يُفْتَى فِي زَمَانِنَا. Right? Because people, لِتَهَاوُنِ النَّاسِ, because of people's laxity and the lack of amana. Right? So this is an example of where the transmission of the madhab is not acted upon with consideration of time and of changing time and circumstance. وَإِن سَلَّمَهُ فِي بَرِّيَّةٍ لَمْ يَبْرَأْ. But if they delivered them in the countryside, right, in the next village, they say, oh, here he is. Okay, now he'll proceed on his own or the gas station outside town. Right? Even Abu Hanifa would not deem that, right? Because the purpose of being a guarantor there is not directly fulfilled, right? But we've already taken what the fatwa is upon. Now, in the Kafala bin Nafs, so let's say there's a court case against Zubair, right? So he is and someone is a Kafil bin Nafs, right? So they're saying, I'll bring them to court, right? وَإِذَا مَاتَ الْمَكْفُولُ بِهِ بَرِئَ الْكَفِيلُ بِالنَّفْسِ مِنَ الْكَفَالَةِ. If the person being guaranteed, right, that I'll bring them to court, for example, dies, then the guarantor doesn't have any responsibility. Because the kafala bin nafs is, I'll bring them to court. I'm not taking on the debt. I am not admitting guilt in the claim or anything of the sort, right? Okay. وَإِن تَكَفَّلَ بِنَفْسِهِ على أنه إن لم يوافي به في وقت كذا فهو ضامن لما عليه وهو 1000 فلم يحضره في ذلك الوقت لزمه ضمان المال ولم يبرأ من كفالة النفس. Right? That it is possible to be a guarantor for the person and for the debt. Right? So he says, if one takes a guarantor, right? If someone becomes a guarantor, that if so and so does not discharge the debt by such and such time, right? So what this is connected to the previous issue, right? If someone is a guarantor, this is al-kafil bin nafs. Someone's a guarantor for the person. So I will bring Zubair to court, right, for the debt. And then he adds to it that if he doesn't pay the debt within the prescribed time, I will become a guarantor for him, such as 1,000. But then he doesn't bring the person within the apportioned time that they'd agreed to in the kafala bin nafs. Then he is now held to be a guarantor for the amount, right? Because a kafala, becoming a guarantor can be made contingent on a shart. Being a guarantor can be made contingent on a shart. On a condition. Which shart? A shart muta'araf. A shart that's customarily made. So the Surah Al-Masala here, وَلَمْ يَبْرَأْ مِنَ الْكَفَالَةِ بِالنَّفْسِ. But one is not freed from the responsibility of bringing the person. So the example, right, is here. There's a court case against Zubair for not paying a $10,000 debt for books. But we don't want Zubair to spend time in jail. Poor guy just got married. So what do? We say, look, the court date is in 2 weeks. Why should he spend time in jail? I'll be the guarantor to bring him to court. And if he doesn't pay within a month of whatever the settlement is, I undertake to guarantee $2,000 of it. Doesn't necessarily have to be the whole amount, because the kafala could be for the full amount or for the partial amount. So here there's two components to it. I served as a guarantor, firstly, to bring him to court, and number two, I also took on the debt. No, didn't take on the debt. I took on to be guarantor for the debt contingently. That if he doesn't pay by this time, I will be a guarantor. And one can make the guarantee contingent upon a condition. And we'll see. Right? And then Abu Hanifa said, لا تجوز الكفالة بالنفس في الحدود والقصاص عند أبي حنيفة. Right? Abu Hanifa said that it is not valid to have a guarantee to deliver a person when it comes to had punishments and the qisas punishments. Right? According to Abu Hanifa. What this means, as explained by the Hidayah, is that you cannot demand someone to bring a person to court. Right? And according to Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? So, but others have explained it distinctly from Imam al-Quduri here, that you can be a guarantor for somebody to bring them to court, but you cannot be held to it. Because of the qadi, like if you fail to bring the person for a had punishment or the qisas punishment, why? Because people are more wary to lose their life than losing their wealth, generally speaking, right? So a person may act in an extraordinary way, right? They may, because there'll be a had punishment against them, let's say if it's established and so on, so there may be extraordinary circumstances there, right? So it's valid to be a guarantor for someone, but the qadi cannot demand it, and therefore the person would not be jailed if they fail to bring them to court with had punishments. Right? Okay. That's a little bit about al-kafala bin nafs. Ultimately, this goes back to largely to court, to what is the law in court, right? What will be the law in court for the like of this? Okay. The more common type of kafala is al-kafala bil-mal, is to be a guarantor for money, right? Like for a debt, right? So he says, أما الكفالة بالمال فجائزة. Having a guarantor for a monetary, some money that is, i.e., money that is due, is valid. But they say there's two considerations, right? One can see the wisdom in it because it facilitates transactions for those whose financial state is not clear. Right? I wanted to open a bookstore in Canada, so I want to get $50,000 worth of books. There's a ready market, etc. But I don't have what we would call now a credit profile, let's say, right? I can't demonstrate a lot of wealth, whatever. So if I have a guarantor, I'm able to transact and benefit. It has the meaning of i'ana al khair, right? Assisting another in good, right? Lifting difficulty from people, right? Etc. That's the praiseworthiness. But it requires caution. Why? Because they say al-kafala akhiruha nadama. The end of being a guarantor is regret. If you're not careful, right? The only reason someone needed a guarantor because their financial state was uncertain, and then you jumped feet first into that uncertainty, right? So he says الكفالة بالمال أما الكفالة بالمال فجائزة معلوما كان المال المكفول به أو مجهولا. It's valid whether the amount owed that's being guaranteed is known, i.e. in its quantity, as mentioned by Imam al-Laknawi in Hashiyat al-Hidayah, or unknown. Right? Known how? That, the Istanbul example, right? I want to buy 50,000 worth of books payable in a year's time. Just simplify, just one payment, pay in a year. So $50,000 debt due March 24th, 2021. I get a guarantor. It says, I undertake to pay this debt. Right? The Kafala contract is separate. Right? Now the Kafala contract, one contract, if you think about it in contracts, right? I buy those books within the contract for the books, right? So if we simplify the contract for the books, I am buying this schedule, the appended list of books for $50,000 from Maktabat Fulani, right? On condition that I am providing a guarantor, so and so, who will serve as a guarantor for this, right? That is a condition in the contract between me, right? But then for that person to serve as a guarantor for me, I have to have an ijab and qabul with him, right? So we have to bring that guarantor in. Either it could be just me and him having that agreement, or it could be, between the guarantor and the person, that yes, I will serve as a guarantor for them, right? And the person accepts, right? Because there's really three parties, right? Is the person who owes the money, the person who's guaranteeing, and who is it being guaranteed for? And the fourth thing is the money itself that is owed, right? The thing itself that is owed. But it could also be undefined. How? Someone wants to buy some books. They said, I need a guarantor for this. So we bring in a third party, said, look, I'm buying some books from this. Can you be my guarantor? The person says, yes, I'm guarantor for whatever books he buys from you. If he doesn't pay, I'll pay. This is of course more dangerous, but you can have an open kafala like this, even if the amount is unknown. Right? إذا كان دينا صحيحا, if it's a sound debt, it's a regular debt. مثل أن يقول تكفلت عنه ب1000, said I am a guarantor for them for 1,000. Right? أو بما لك عليه, or I'm a guarantor for whatever he owes you. أو بما يدركك في هذا البيع, or I'm a guarantor for whatever becomes due to you from this sale. Right? And this is called ضمان الدرك, right? Because that a few other things can enter into that. Okay. وَالْمَكْفُولُ لَهُ بِالْخِيَارِ. Now, what now is the use of kafala? Right? What's the use of having a guarantor? الْمَكْفُولُ لَهُ بِالْخِيَارِ. The one whom the guarantee was for, meaning the person owed the money. Right? إِنْ شَاءَ طَالَبَ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْأَصْلِ. If they wish, they can demand the payment once due from the one who owes the money. In the book example, me, I bought the books and I owe 50,000, so you can demand it from me. وَإِنْ شَاءَ طَالَبَ الْكَفِيلَهُ. And if they wish, they can demand the payment from the guarantor. Right? Because this goes back to the meaning of kafala. It's to add, the guarantor adds their dues, their responsibility to the responsibility of the one who owes in terms of repayment. Right? But if they demand from one, it does not lift the responsibility of the other to pay, nor the right to demand from the other as well, until one or the other pay. You can see that in Bajalla item 644. Okay. ويجوز تعليق الكفالة بالشرط. It is valid to make the kafala contingent upon a condition that is suitable. Right? That is suitable or customary. Right? أو متعارف. Right? مثل أن يقول ما بايعت فلانا فعليه. For example, whatever you sell to so and so, the payment is due on me. Right? So you made your debt conditional upon any transaction that the party makes. Right? Right? أو ما ذاب لك عليه فعليه. That whatever is established that is owed to you from him, I'm a guarantor for it. Right? Why would you make that kind of guarantee? Because someone, for example, is now setting up shop. They're setting up a bookstore in Istanbul. Nobody knows him in the market. So the person becomes an ongoing guarantor. Right? That the person's dealing with 5 different book suppliers. So he says, okay, anything that he buys from you, it is upon me. Right? So it is conditional upon any transaction, for example. But he could limit it, right? He could say any transaction under 10,000, I will undertake. And that condition would be considered, right? Because he's willing to take, or I'll be a guarantor to a maximum of such and such. Right? So the person would know that as long as I don't rack up a debt owed to me of $10,000 from so and so, Uncle Bilal will be the guarantor. But if I take on more than that, Uncle Bilal will only guarantee 10,000. So it's up to me if I let him owe more than that. Okay. وإذا قال تكفلت بما لك عليه فقامت البينة ب1000 عليه ضمنه الكفيل. Right? If the kafil makes a general guarantee, I am a guarantor for whatever he owes you, and then a proof is established that 1,000 is owed, then the guarantor is responsible for making the payment if the asil doesn't. Right? But it has to be established, right? وإن لم تقم البينة فالقول قول الكفيل. But if there's no proof, right? So what's the scenario? There's a book supplier that says, so the kafil, the Uncle Bilal is the kafil. He's the guarantor for me. I'm trying to sell books in Istanbul. So book supplier says, so Uncle Bilal says, I'll be a guarantor for anything that Faraz owes you. Right? So if he has proof, proofs would be witnesses or invoices, for example. Right? If he has proofs that Faraz owes the book supplier $1,000, the guarantor, Uncle Bilal, has to make the payment. But what if the supplier doesn't have proof? So the supplier is coming to Uncle Bilal that Faraz owes $1,000. Does the book supplier have proof? No. So who's making the claim of the debt? The book supplier, right? البينة على المدعي. The one making a claim has the burden of proof. واليمين على من أنكر. Right? And they say القول للمنكر. Right? And the word of the one denying is accepted unless there's proof against them. فالقول قول الكفيل. So the word of the guarantor is accepted مع يمينه, with their يمين, with their oath. في مقدار ما يتعرض به, ما يعترف به, مع يمينه في مقدار ما يعترف به, with their يمين, with their oath, with respect to what they admit. Right? So if they say no, all I know is he owes you 500. Right? So he admits to 500, doesn't admit to more. So that's accepted. Right? Because let's say Uncle Bilal says, look, we have an agreement that if he takes on debt, he'll tell me. So I only know about $500 of debt. So he's denying more than 500. So unless there's proof, that's why putting transactions in writing is so important, right? But reality is people don't. Even companies don't often because they deal fast, right? فإن اعترف المكفول عنه بأكثر من ذلك لم يصدق على كفيله. But if the one being guaranteed for admits to owing more than that, i.e. more than what the guarantor admitted to, right? This is not accepted on behalf of the guarantor. So what's the case? The bookseller, and that's why it's good to make specific cases, right? Scenario. What's a scenario? Bookseller, so Uncle Bilal is a kafil for me, is a guarantor for me. I'm buying books on debt and then reselling them. The book supplier claims that I owe them $1,000. But they don't provide proof. The guarantor, so they demand the money because I'm broke, man. I can't buy even simit bread, let alone give you $1,000. So they go to demand from Uncle Bilal, who's my kafil. Uncle Bilal says, is there any proof? No proof. Uncle Bilal says, I know that he owes you $500. Not more than that. Right? So here, who is making a claim of a debt? The book supplier. He's claiming 1,000. He's making the claim against Uncle Bilal. Uncle Bilal is denying anything above 500. Of course, morally, you cannot deny what you hold to be true, right? Because otherwise it'll be a false oath. So you swear, and you swear by Allah, and we'll look at like how you swear by Allah in a sound manner in these situations, in Bab al-Shahada, etc. And we'll see, and that's. So he swears by Allah that I am not aware of a debt above $500. So he only has to pay 500. Now here, but I admit that that the book supplier is owed 1,000. My admission is not. Now that's why they say al-bayyinatu hujjatun muta'addiya. Like the bayyina, an actual proof, two witnesses or an invoice, etc. This serves as proof against another. Right? البينة حجة متعددة. Right? The bayyinah serves as proof against another. Right? والاعتراف حجة قاصرة. Right? But an admission is a limited proof. Right? An admission counts against you, doesn't count against another. So let's say, instead of me, it was like, let's say there was someone who's going to be leaving Turkey. Right? Uncle Bilal is a Turkish businessman who is serving as a guarantor for a talib ilm. Now this talib ilm turned out to be corrupt, so what does he do? Before leaving Istanbul, he says, Your Majesty, or whatever, Hadrat al-Qadi, I owe $10,000 to the book supplier. I can't pay it. Imagine if my admission counted against Uncle Bilal. What would happen? Poor Uncle Bilal, I make a false admission. The admission doesn't require proof. And it would be that admission counts against me. But imagine if it applied against Uncle Bilal. Would that make any sense? So I admit to owing $100,000 to the bookseller. I collude with the bookseller. Uncle Bilal, because he's wealthy, the court takes $100,000 from him based on my admission against myself. And then I leave Istanbul. And the bookseller is not going to chase after me anyways because they colluded. He got $100,000, he gave me $10,000. وَلِعَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Okay? That's why, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? The hadith of البينة على المدعي لو يعطى الناس بدعواهم. Right? If people were given according to their claims, people would claim the very lives of people and their wealth. لكن البينة على المدعي, the burden of proof is on the one making a claim. وَالْيَمِينُ عَلَى مَنْ أَنْكَرَ. A corollary of that is that an admission counts against you, is evidence against you. It cannot be used as evidence against another. Right? Unless they admit to it, right? They admit, yeah, I've seen the bills and so on, so they admit to it, that's a different thing, right? Now, the kafala, sometimes it can be explicit, right? That, I wanted to enter into, I wanted to buy the $50,000 of books, so we included the kafala into the agreement, I explicitly sought, I explicitly sought a kafil, a guarantor. But in some cases, someone could be an angel guarantor, so to speak, right? So some young guy, optimistic, says, I'm going to set up a bookstore and I'm going to buy from these people. And so Uncle Bilal is a righteous man. What does he do? He quietly talks to those people that, look, this young guy who's come to our marketplace, I'll be their guarantor. Don't tell him. I want to build his confidence. But within certain limits. So he enters into aqd kafala. He becomes a guarantor on my behalf, whether unconditionally or conditionally, and that's also valid. Right? And there are people who used to do things like this. Right? So he says, وَتَجُوزُ الْكَفَالَةُ بِأَمْرِ الْمَكْفُولَ عَنْهُ. It is valid, the kafala is valid with the request of the one being guaranteed for, وَبِغَيْرِ هَمْرِ, and without their command. That's the فَإِنْ كَفَّلَ بِأَمْرِهِ رَجَعَ بِمَا يُؤَدِّي عَلَيْهِ. Right? If one guaranteed with the request of another, then the guarantor has the right to go back to the one they guaranteed for and seek repayment from them. So what's the case? That I requested Uncle Bilal to be my guarantor. Right? So in this case, and I owe $10,000. I owe $10,000 to the book supplier. I couldn't pay, Uncle Bilal paid. But he's a guarantor by my request. If he pays the $10,000, after that, he has a right to demand the $10,000 from me. Right? If it was with my request. وَإِن كَفَّلَ بِغَيْرِ أَمْرِهِ. But if someone guaranteed without the request of the one who owes the money, لَمْ يَرْجِعْ بِمَا يُؤَدِّيهِ. Right? Then they don't have a legal right to demand the repayment from the person who owed the money. Because so what's the scenario? I took on a debt. I can't pay it right now. Right? Uncle Bilal decided to be a guarantor on my behalf. I didn't request him to be my guarantor. So he made the payment. That's like tabarru'. That's considered in court a gift. Because there's no taradi. There's no agreement between us. Because I may not want someone to be a guarantor on my behalf. Imagine if my competitor decides to be my guarantor. Uncertain market conditions, right? Let's say right now, right? Like I have books stuck in Istanbul. I don't know if they can be shipped to me. Right? Let's say my competitor decides to be my guarantor. And then goes in and pays on my behalf. And says, now you pay me. And starts tormenting me. Right? I'd rather be in debt to someone I agreed to transact with than have to pay someone I didn't agree to. Right? Now, diyanatan, religiously, in reasonable circumstances, yes, I have a moral duty to pay the person. right? I have a moral duty to pay the person. But that becomes complicated, right? That becomes complicated. But you can see scenarios where I would say, look, you don't have a right to demand from me. I'll pay when I can. You don't have a right to demand. I did not ask you to make the payment, right? Why? Because if I was in difficulty, like I only transacted with merciful merchants. Some shark came in and paid my debts and then demands the money. Like collection agencies, for example, right? Someone becomes a kafil shark, right? They jump in and say, I'll pay for these guys, and then they demand and they send thugs to demand payment, make court cases, etc. They get, that's why. But certainly in the case where someone did it out of goodwill, there'd be a moral duty to pay them, right? وليس للكفيل أن يطالب المكفول عنه بالمال حتى قبل أن يؤديه عنه. Lots of ضميرs here, right? Right? It is the guarantor, Uncle Bilal, does not have the right to demand the one they're a guarantor for, me who owes the $10,000. He doesn't have a right of demanding the money from me until قبل أن يؤديه, until the guarantor pays it, means pays the guaranteed amount on behalf of the one they're a guarantor for, right? So in the case of, I owe $10,000 to the book supplier, right? The book supplier goes to Uncle Bilal and says, Faraz owes $10,000. Uncle Bilal can't demand $10,000 from me until he actually pays it to the book supplier. He can give me nasiha, I'd advise you pay it. I can pay it on your behalf if you give me the pay. That's talab. But demand, he can only demand that I repay him if he first makes the payment, right? Because that's the role of he becomes liable, right? It's the one owed the money, right? The book supplier can demand repayment from me, I'm the asil, or from the kafil, right? That's what's happening. So now the 10,000 is owed. He can demand it from A or from B, or from both until one or the other repays, right? And we'll see what if both can only pay part. So you can take part from each, and the remaining you can demand it from either one. Okay. So now in this scenario, the only time that the guarantor can demand money from the asil, right? And what are they also called? The asil is also called al-makful anhu, right? The one they're guarantor for, meaning guarantor on behalf of, when they have made the payment. Because the payment, the guarantor is making a payment on behalf of the person they're a guarantor for. Okay. Now, فإن لوزم بالمال كان له أن يلازم المكفول عنه. Right? So this is if the debtor, the one owed the money, is now, is being followed, right? To make the repayment, right? So the bookseller is chasing after the guarantor to make the payment, right? فإن لوزم الكفيل بالمال, right? That you have to pay up. he has a right, the guarantor has a right to chase after the one they're guaranteed, their guarantor for, the makful anhu, and me in this case that we're looking at, حتى يخلصه, until they discharge the debt. وإذا أبرأ الطالب المكفول عنه أو استوفى منه برئ الكفيل. If the one who's owed the money, the book supplier, waives the debt from the one who owed the money, i.e. me, or collects the debt from them, the guarantor is freed of responsibility, right? So same scenario. Bookseller is owed $10,000 by by me, by the da'in, by the one in debt. I owe $10,000 to the bookseller. So I'm called the asil. I took a kafil. I took a guarantor. The guarantor is, I am the makful anhu. And I am the one who's being guaranteed, who the guarantee is for, on behalf of. So here, the one owed the money can demand from me and can demand from Uncle Bilal. If the bookseller, abra'a, if he says, okay, Faraz, you're a total loser. You don't owe the money. If he waives the debt from me, the debt's gone. It's no longer due upon the kafil. Because I am the person who owes the money. If you waive it from me, it's waived from, because he's just guaranteeing my debt in terms of payment. Right? If I repay the debt, khalas, it's lifted from me, it's lifted from the guarantor as well. And of course, this has derivative consequences, right? That, what if, I owe $100,000. So there's one collection agency on behalf of the book supplier, one collection thug chasing after me, and one collection thug chasing after Uncle Bilal. So they show up with some Turkish torture tools from like the Ertugrul time or whatever. I get scared, I pay up $10,000. And Uncle Bilal pays up $10,000. Okay? My payment absolved him from the responsibility of paying. His repayment has to be returned, right? Okay. ولا يجوز تعليق البراءة بالكفالة من الكفالة بشرط. So, it is not valid to make being absolved from the kafala, from the guarantee, conditional upon a condition. Right? And the scenario would be if he says that if he doesn't pay by tomorrow, then I'm not responsible. That meaning the guarantor is not responsible. Or I'm responsible for 30 days. After that, I'm not responsible. Right? Right? And in the Hidayah, it mentions that it's related that it is valid to make the kafala contingent upon the kafala, the responsibility for guarantee contingent upon a condition. That I'll be a guarantor for 1 year, for example, right? That those, and after that I'm not responsible, right? And it's mentioned in both Majma' al-Anhur and al-Durr al-Muntaqa that within the boundaries of al-muta'araf, customary conditions, this is accepted. Right? That you say, okay, I'll be a guarantor. I'll only be a guarantor for a year. Right? And then I'm not a guarantor. Right? For example, that's accepted. Now you can only be a guarantor for rights that you can discharge. Right? وكل حق لا يمكن استيفاؤه من الكفيل لا تصح الكفالة به كالحدود والقصاص. Every right that cannot be repaid or cannot be discharged by the guarantor, they cannot. The guarantor cannot be guarantor for, such as had punishments or qisas. You say, okay, if he kills anybody, kill me instead. If he steals, chop my hand instead, right? For example, right? And of course, لا يمكن, what's meant by لا يمكن, right? Every right that is not possible to discharge, meaning أي لا يصح شرعا, that is not legally, it's not شرعا, legally, permitted to discharge. Right? وإذا تكفل عن المشتري بالثمن جاز. Right? If one is a guarantor on behalf of the buyer to pay the price, this is valid. Right? Because it's a sound. So this is now enumerating the types of kafala that are valid. وإذا تكفل عن البائع بالمبيع لم يصح. But if one is a guarantor on behalf of the buyer, on behalf of the seller with the item of sale, it is not valid. Because the item of sale and here, just you can take a note that here there's a good explanation of this in Hashit al-Laknawi on the Hidayah, volume 5, page 316, in the Idarat al-Quran edition, I believe. Right? Because why? So, because in a sale, the item of sale is specified, right? So say, I'm a guarantor that he'll get that. Let's say with a mabi'a is mutayan. I say, let's say I sold this carpet for this. It's a unique carpet. I sell this carpet for $500, $1,000, let's say, $1,000. Okay. To Uncle Bilal. Uncle Bilal said, I want a guarantor. So Zafar says, I'll be the guarantor for the carpet. How can he be guarantor for the carpet? Okay, because it's المبيع يتعين. Right? The item of sale is specific. Is this carpet? Right? If I don't give the carpet, what happens? I have to return the price. What can my guarantor do? Right? And this is explained out in the commentary, right? ومن استأجر دابة ليحمل عليها فإن كانت الإجارة بعينها لم تصح الكفالة بالحمل. Right? Right? If one rents an animal, to transport some things on it. If the hire was of a particular animal, then it is not valid to have a guarantor for that contract of hire. Why? Because let's say I have one camel, right? And Uncle Bilal hired me to transport $10,000 worth of books for him with that particular camel, right? So the ijara is what? For my one camel, fufu, to transport things from Istanbul to Bursa, let's say. How can Zafar be a guarantor for that? Because the contract of hire was fufu itself was hired to do the transporting. وإن كانت بغير عينها, but if the kafala was not, or the ijara, if the rent, the hire contract was not for a particular animal to transport, say I'm hiring your services to transport these $10,000 of books from Istanbul to Bursa, without specifying what the mode of transport would be. My responsibility is to take the books from there, then jazat al-kafala, right? Because then the kafil can deliver it. It's deliverable. That if I prove incapable of doing the transporting, then the transporting can be, which is something of known value, he's responsible for ensuring its transporting, right? Or for giving the refund. ولا تصح الكفالة إلا بقبول المكفول له في مجلس العقد. Right? It is only valid to have a contract of kafala, of guarantee, if the makful lahu, if the one who the kafala is for, agrees in the majlis. Who's the makful lahu? Right? The makful lahu is the one the debt is owed to, agrees. Right? Imagine if I entered into a contract with the bookseller, and he comes to demand money from me, $10,000. I have a guarantor. You can demand the money from him. Uncle Bilal agreed with me, but how does this agreement between me and my guarantor relate to the one being owed the money? He says, I have nothing to do with this. Right? So it is only valid, i.e. and binding, if the one who is owed the money, the makful lahu, the one who is owed the money, agreed in the majlis of the aqd, in the majlis of the kafala. Right? Right? This is according to Imam Abu Hanifa. However, Abu Yusuf said no, as long as he accepted it later, it will be valid. And but right? Right? إلا في مسألة واحدة وهي أن يقول المريض لورثه تكفل عني بما علي من الدين فتكفل به مع غيبة الغرماء فإنه يصح اتفاقا استحسانا. Right? In one condition, with one exception, which is if someone is on their deathbed and they say to their inheritors, be my guarantor with respect to what I owe people, and they accept to be guarantors on behalf of him, despite the people being owed, being absent. This is valid. Why? To protect the rights of those owed. If someone's on their deathbed, they have children who are concerned. Right? So there's an interest for the dying party and there's an interest for those owed the money. Right? Right? وإذا كان الدين على اثنين, if there's a debt owed to two people, there's a debt owed by two people, وكل واحد منهما كفيل ضامن عن الآخر, and each is a guarantor on behalf of the other. Right? And the example they give is, for example, two people bought an item for $1,000, for example. Right? So two people bought an item for $1,000. Let's say this mic was worth $1,000. It's not, it's worth 150 or whatever, but say the mic was worth $1,000. So Omar and I bought the mic together. We both bought it. We both paid $500. Now, Uncle Zain was like, you're going to pay $500 each for this? He said, each of us is a guarantor for the other. So I owe $500, and if Omar doesn't pay, I'm a kafil for his $500. And he says the same regarding me. So this is the Surah Al-Masala. فَمَا أَدَّى أَحَدُهُمَا لَمْ يَرْجِعْ بِهِ عَلَى شَرِيكِهِ حَتَّى يَزِيدَ مَا يُؤَدِّيهِ عَلى نَفْسِهِ. So in this case, neither, two parties bought something, right, together, yeah, and each is a guarantor for the other. The example, the item, mic, was 1,000. We each paid said we each owe 500 for it, and each is a guarantor for the other. I don't have a right to demand repayment for Omar for his 500 until I have paid my 500 first. You can't say, well, each dollar I put up, half of it's on behalf of me and half of it's on behalf of you. Right? And the legal reasoning of that. But once I have paid my 500, then I have a right, if I pay more than that, once I discharge my debt, because I'm asil min wajh, kafil min wajh. Right? Because when I'm paying, in this scenario, $1,000 mic, I paid 500, I owe 500, Omar owes 500. I owe 500 and I'm a guarantor for the other 500 in this case. Any payment I make till the amount I owe counts as my debt, because that's my primary obligation. Only when I have cleared my debt am I now acting as a guarantor on behalf of the other. Okay. وإذا تكفل اثنان عن رجل ب1,000 على أن كل واحد منهما كفيل عن صاحبه فما أداه أحدهما يرجع بنصفه على شريكه قليلا كان أو كثيرا. But if two people agree to be a guarantor on behalf of a person for $1,000, with the condition that each of them is a guarantor on behalf of the other, right? What's the scenario? I bought this mic for $1,000 from Uncle Zain. Now, Uncle Zain's a tough guy. So he's like, I don't think you can pay 1,000. So two people want to be guarantors because they really want me to get a nice mic. So what do? Umar and Hamza say, both of us are guarantors. But then they're like, oh my God, that's a lot. Both of us are guarantors for this 1,000 on condition that each of us, right? Are guarantors on behalf of the other. So in this case, what happens? So there's two guarantors say, we are both acting together. Because you could have two independent guarantors, that's a separate scenario. But here, these are sort of they're guarantors together. So in that case, if I didn't pay up, so Hamza paid 500, but so they become sort of guarantors in partnership, Umar and Hamza. So either one pays anything, they're paying on behalf of both the guarantors because they became dependent guarantors, so to speak. So what one pays, so they paid $500 of the 1,000 owed. Hamza paid it. He can demand 250 from Umar if this extra condition that each is guaranteeing on behalf of the other, right? Whether it's a little or a lot. يعني ولا تجوز الكفالة بمال الكتابة يعني حر تكفل به أو عبد. It is not valid to be the guarantor for the money of someone being a mukatab, whether the one who is guaranteeing is free or a slave, right? And that relates to أحكام of slavery. We don't need to unpack. وإذا مات الرجل وعليه ديون ولم يترك شيئا فتكفل رجل عنه للغرماء لم يصح الكفالة عند أبي حنيفة وقالا تصح الكفالة. Right? If a man dies and he owes many debts and doesn't leave any money, he didn't appoint anyone to take, and we already took the issue. And in his lifetime, if his children agreed to be kafil on his behalf, that's a separate issue, right? But here he didn't leave wealth and didn't leave, he didn't appoint anybody. So person says that I'll be his guarantor. And of course the issue is he did not leave anything. This is important, right? Because if he left something, that would be a different issue. So he takes it on to the debtor, say, I will be their guarantor. But then it was wishful thinking. But then he's not able to. This kafala is not valid because rather this is considered tabarru'. This is just considered to be acting unilaterally. If he wants to give it, it counts as tabarru'. He's just giving it one-sidedly. This according to Imam Abu Hanifa. The Sahibain allowed this, that he's taken on a debt. Right? They considered it to be taking on a debt. But most of the scholars of the madhab took the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? That is considered. So let's say Zubair died, because Zubaydah said no. Zubair died, he had no wealth. So Uncle Jamil felt bad. I said no to him and he died. Bichara. So he goes to the marketplace, says, I feel sorry for Zubair. Anybody who owes money, I am his guarantor. He's guarantor on behalf of someone who's dead. Zubair didn't appoint him. This will be considered just tabarru' from him. So this does not count as kafala technically. If he does repay them, it's by his tib al-nafs. But he does this, he's not. What's the importance of it? According to Abu Hanifa, this is not kafala, meaning it's not binding upon Uncle Jamil in that case, right? Right. Now, what would the fatwa be here? So that's why the issue is of consideration in terms of what the fatwa would be. Then what are the consequences related to this? Then we reach hawala, money transfer, right? Hawala. Okay, now, sorry, I was going to caution about this. Hawala in modern usages has to do with money transfers, right? But I had a slip of the tongue, I was going to warn about this. Hawala in classical fiqh is naqlu dayn, ay tahweelu dayn min dhimmatin ila dhimmatin ukhra, right? It's transferring a debt from one person's due to another. So this is a brief section, and it's pretty straightforward, right? So, right, al-hawala, hawala in Arabic language, hawala yuhawwilu is a naql, is to move something from one place to another, right? And hawala is naqlu dayn min dhimmati al-muhil ila dhimmati al-muhal alayhi, right? That hawala, it's transfer of debt. It's to transfer a debt owed from one person's dues to another's, right? And how is it different from kafala? Right? Kafala is not a transfer of the debt, right? In kafala, I owe $10,000 to the bookseller, to the book supplier. In kafala, Uncle Bilal becomes my guarantor. I owe the money. The person the money is owed to, the book supplier, can demand it from me or can demand it from my guarantor. If the guarantor pays, what does he do? He has the right, then he demands it from me, right? Assuming that he was guarantor on with my agreement, right? But the debt remains owed by me ultimately in the kafala. In hawala, the debt is being transferred from me to another party, right? So I owe $10,000 to the book suppliers. The book suppliers come to me, I say, I can't pay. They threaten to chop different limbs, this and that, because they've gone into full gangster mode. So I get scared. Say, if you don't pay in 24 hours, we're going to do this, that, the other. So I transfer the debt to Uncle Bilal. That's the hawala. What does it require? Right? Does it require agreement of the one who is owed? Let's see. Right? Kitab al-hawala. Al-hawala jaizatun bid-duyun. Right? Right? A transfer of debt is valid in debts. But it's valid if the muhil, who is the one who will madyun, the one in debt, agrees, wal muhal lahu, and the one who's owed the money agrees. Right? Because if it requires my agreement, because I don't want someone else to take on the debt. Right? My competitor comes out, I'll pay instead. Transfer the debt to me. And then he goes around town saying, poor guy, Faraz started this company, bichara, poor guy. He took on $10,000 debt. Now I am paying it. It requires my agreement, because I'm the one owed the debt. Right? This is aqd. And what's the basis of aqd? إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَن تَرَاضٍ. It will be trade through mutual agreement. So I have to agree. The one who owes the money, that's the muhil, who would normally be the one seeking to transfer the debt. وَالْمُحْتَالَ لَهُ. But also the one, the da'in, the one who is owed the money, has to agree. Because imagine, I take on a $10,000 debt, and then I go, I transfer the debt to Zubair, my broke friend. You agree for me to owe you money. Would you agree for Zubair to owe you $10,000? No, right? Maybe you would, but it requires your agreement, right? So that's why it requires the agreement of al-muhtal lahu, right? And here, Majalla items 682 and before and after gives defined the muhil is the madyun. The muhil is the one who owes the money. Al-muhal lahu is ad-da'in, right? Is the one who's owed the money. Al-muhal alayhi is the one the debt is transferred to, right? And the debt is called muhal bihi. So you can write those down, right? Okay. Right? So it requires the agreement of the one who owes the money and the one whom the money is owed to, and also al-muhal alayhi, and the one the debt is transferred to. Because imagine if I transfer the debt to Uncle Bilal, so the bookseller, the book supplier agrees. I agree. But Uncle Bilal, he didn't agree. Of course it doesn't count, right? Right? Okay. وَإِذَا تَمَّتِ الْحَوَالَةِ, right? If the hawala is complete, right? So if I transfer the debt, I owe $10,000, so I say I want to transfer this debt to Uncle Bilal, right? I am the muhil, right? And Uncle Bilal is the muhal alayhi. He's the one who the debt is being transferred to. He agrees. And the one the money is owed to agrees. He's called the muhal lahu, right? If we agree. So, and it's complete, right? Bari al-muhil min ad-dain. Then, the one who transferred the debt away from themselves, the original person in debt, they're free of the debt. And you can see item 690 of the Majalla explains what is the hukum of the hawala in a very nice way. Okay. Once the debt is transferred from me, ولم يرجع المحال على المحيل إلا أن يتوي عفوا إلا أن يتوى حقه. Right? If the debt is transferred, then the one who is owed the money does not have the right to demand it from the person who originally owed the money. The debt was transferred from me. So I bought $10,000 of books from the bookseller. He came to demand the money. I said, can I transfer the debt to Uncle Bilal? Uncle Bilal. So I requested it. Uncle Bilal agrees. The bookseller agrees. So we transferred the debt. Now the debt is owed by Uncle Bilal. I'm not owed the money. Now Uncle Bilal doesn't pay. The basis is I'm cleared of the dues. He owes. But there's one exception. Unless their right is destroyed. إلا أن يتوى حقه. والتوى عند أبي حنيفة أحد أمرين. What is the ruining of the right? Only two, right? إما أن يجحد الحوالة ويحلف ولا بينة. Right? So in this case, it goes to Uncle Bilal. So I admit that the debt was transferred to Uncle Bilal. The person owed the money, accepts that. But the right is being ruined here. How? That In one case is that the one the debt was transferred to, يجحد الحوالة, he denies the hawala. So I admit, I recognize the debt, but I transferred it, and I believe that it was transferred, right? The one the money is owed to accepts this fact, right? Because he agreed to it too. So he admits to it. But is our admission counting against him? No. Now he originally admitted to it. Morally, he is responsible. But in court, what's he doing? He is denying it. Now can I and the bookseller serve as witnesses against Uncle Bilal? No. Because we have a vested interest in that, we are making a claim against him. So we can't be witnesses for our own claim, right? So he rejects it, right? Right? And he swears, and this is very grave, al-yaminul ghamus. This is the false oath. It's called an enveloping oath because it envelops the person in sin. And we don't have proof. We don't have proof of this hawala. It was just verbal. So in this case, what happens? There's the underlying principle of hifzul huquq. Everybody accepts what? That the bookseller is owed $10,000. So if we cannot establish, morally, of course, morally, we can't, morally, we don't believe in thug law. Uncle Bilal owes $10,000. Can we go and beat him up and steal his money, etc.? No. We take it to court. In court, we can't establish a case against him. So therefore, I would be responsible to pay the debt because that it's established that I originally owed the debt, right? أو يموت مفلسا, or if the one the debt was transferred to dies having been deemed bankrupt in court, right? And the taflis, according to Abu Hanifa, is only established عند القاضي, right? And there's principles related to that, right? And this is the mufta bihi, right? Right? And the author al-Lubab doesn't frequently quote Ibn Abidin, but here he does, right? He doesn't explicitly quote Ibn Abidin frequently, although he relies so deeply on the hashia of his teacher. He says, وَقَالَ هَذَانِ وَوَجْهٌ ثَالِث وَهُوَ أَنْ يَحْكُمَ الْحَاكِمْ بِإِفْلَاسِهِ حَالَ حَيَاتِهِ. Or if the judge, so this is أن يموت مفلسا, that the person die bankrupt. Why? Because Abu Hanifa said that iflas, bankruptcy, is not a permanent state, right? لأن المال غاد ورائح, because wealth comes and goes, right? Someone could be declared bankrupt today, then could make money, the next day he has money. So according to Abu Hanifa, either the person denies it or he dies in a state of bankruptcy. And this goes back to the issue of the declaration of bankruptcy. When is it accepted? The Sahibain said no. If the person is deemed bankrupt in court, يحكم بإفلاسه, then immediately the debt is owed by the original party. The proof for Imam Abu Hanifa within the madhab is stronger. What's the fatwa? Here one would return to what the contemporary circumstances are in a particular time, right? Then he says, وَإِذَا طَالَبَ الْمُحَالَ عَلَيْهِ الْمُحِيلِ بِمِثْلِ مَالِ الْحَوَالَةِ فَقَالَ الْمُحِيلِ أَحَلْتُ بِدَيْنٍ لي عليك لم يقبل قوله. Right? And this is why you need to keep track of المحال عليه is يعني من قبل الحوالة. Right? Right? المحيل, right, is المديون الأصلي. Right? Right? So here, إذا طالب المحال عليه, if the one who accepted the transfer of debt, Uncle Bilal, right, demands from the one who transferred the debt to him, me, who owed the $10,000, right? بمثل مال الحوالة, for the like of the debt that was owed. Claiming, and so the muhil, so the right? فقال المحيل أخذت بدين لي عليك. Right? So that I only took it. Sorry. What's? Yeah, أحلت بدين لي عليك. Right? So the muhil, who is the one who transferred the debt, said, I only transferred the debt to you for a debt that you owe me. This is not accepted. وَكَانَ عَلَيْهِ مِثْلُ الدَّيْنِ, and he has to give the like of the debt. وإذا طالب المحيل المحتال بما أحاله به فقال إنما أحلتك لتقبضه لي وقال المحال بل أحلتني بدين لي عليك فالقول قول المحيل. Right? So if the muhil, right, if the one who originally owed the money demands from the one the debt was transferred, the debt was transferred to, that I only transferred it in order that you paid the debt on my behalf. But the one the debt was transferred to said, no, you transferred it in exchange for a debt that you owe me. فالقول قول المحيل, the claim here of the muhil, of the one who originally owed the debt, is accepted, right? Because the one the debt was transferred to is making a claim that this was an exchange of a debt owed. Right? So what's the scenario? I need to pay the bookseller $10,000. I transfer the debt to Uncle Bilal. Then he says, I only accepted this because you owed me money. So he's claiming another debt. And this claim would require proof. Otherwise it's not accepted. Right? And then there's one issue that he closes the chapter with. وَيُكْرَهُ السَّفَاتِجِ, right? It's also called السُّفْتُجَ, right? Or السُّفْتَجَ, right? Right? وهو قرض استفاد به المقرض أمن خطر الطريق. أمن خطر الطريق. It's disliked to give a debt in exchange for safety of passage, right? So the scenario, as explained in the Durar, is that, let's say, the scenario used to be, for example, I want to travel to, this is the old days. I live in Karachi. I want to go to trade in Istanbul with 50,000 dirhams, old days. If I take 50,000 dirham from Karachi to Istanbul, there's a lot of people on the way. Like I'm walking money. People are in need. Not all intelligent people are moral people. It's a very rational thing that if people are traveling and they have money and people are needy, what would they do? Can you assume morality on behalf of people? No. Highway robbery makes economic sense. It does not make moral sense because you're going to be punished in the hereafter and be punished in this dunya. Right? But that's why the punishment of highway robbery is so... I'm a walking invitation for robbery. So what do I do? So safatuj or safatij is that I lend money here. So now traders, they said, okay, look, it's going to take me a while to get to the other side. So give me the money here and you can collect the money in Istanbul. Because traders know traders. I give you the money here, 50,000 dirham. When I get to Istanbul, I go to Uncle Bilal. So here, Uncle Jamal Sindhi says, okay, give me 50,000 here and you can collect it with Uncle Kamal al-Busnawi in Istanbul. Okay. What do I benefit from it? But this is a qard jarra naf'an. This is makruh. This is a loan. I gave the money here, I'll collect it there. Right? From the person or their agent, for which I acquired benefit. Problem of this is, what's the problem in this? Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an qardin jarra naf'an. I gave this debt, I acquired benefit from it, which is safety of passage. So that's why it's makruh. Right? Right? Now, is this like a check? Right? There are contemporary applications related to this, but the saftaja, the ulama deemed it problematic. It's like a check. Like people used to travel with with travelers' checks. Right? You want to travel with money, so you get travelers' checks and you cash them on the other side. Right? So that on the journey you're not carrying around a lot of cash. So the ruling itself of saftaja is this way. The contemporary applications of this, we can leave them separate. You can see in Aqd al-Bay' or Mufti Taqi Usmani, for example, there are discussions, Fiqh al-Buyu', it's called. There are discussions on this matter. We'll stop there, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And the next chapter is Sulh. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We'll begin by giving a few more examples related to the hawala. Bi'idhnillah. Just remind me. Walhamdulillah.